Hello, welcome. We are doing a panel on what's it like to have bias in the interview. I am Katie Farmer, Technical Community Manager at CircleCI, and I'm very lucky to have a panel of experts and overall impressive brains with me today. I want to do some intros first. So tell me your name, what you do at Circle, and what encouraged you to be here today, starting with Casey, please.
Hey y'all, I'm Casey. I am a recruiter here at CircleCI on the go-to-market side. So basically that means anything outside of engineering. I've been here about 15 months, which has flown by, and I'm just here to share some things that I've learned throughout my own process of interviewing over the years.
Yeah. Lauren?
My name is Lauren. I am Director of Recruiting at CircleCI, and I've been here over 4 years now. It's been an incredible journey of learning and experience and building amazing teams, including these three folks on the call. Happy to be here. Steph?
I'm Steph, and I've been at CircleCI for a whole 2.5 months, and I work in sourcing on the engineering side, so working to find passive talent who may be interested, may not have thought about CircleCI. And I'm excited to be here just to share and also listen. I love learning from other folks as well.
Yeah, me too. Really, my job here is to make sure that some questions get asked, but also so that I can secretly just become smarter. So today we're talking about navigating the hiring process. One of the things that kind of brought this conversation to mind is that we're celebrating Pride Month, and we want to make sure that all of the people who may experience bias for any reason get their best shot in interviews, right? And I, in particular, had a very lovely experience interviewing with CircleCI. Casey, you were my recruiter. I heart you for life. Like, we want people to do well and be empowered, right? So that's why we've assembled all of these experts to say, what can you do to be your best and be aware of bias on both sides of the conversation? So one thing I want to ask is that something that people tell me a lot is that I'm interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing me. And that feels true, but also can be really hard to do. I want to start with that just as an idea of if any of you have something to, any compelling thoughts on that. Like, if I'm interviewing the company, what does that mean? How do I ask smart questions?
I mean, that's a great point, Katie. And that is, take some time before the interview and do come up with those questions, those things that mean a lot to you, whether it be about the team, your potential manager, or if it's about the work environment, if you want to know about if there's employee resource groups available to you, what the benefits are like, think about what is important to you and make sure to ask those questions. And I think it helps to write it down beforehand because interviewing is stressful. It's a weird environment and you don't want to forget.
True.
+1. And what's important to you may be very different from the next person who interviews. And so it is absolutely a good idea to prep yourself ahead of time. And besides researching about the company and these things that are most important to you, I think another thing is that everyone you speak to during the process is representing the company and will be representative of your experience there. So do you find them, are you enjoying your conversations with them? Do you feel like they're being courteous? Are they somebody you could see yourself working with and you would enjoy? Do you feel like you can learn from them, particularly around your manager? Obviously, that's really important. And asking questions about their management style, things like that are really fair too. You spend so much time at work, so you want to make sure you feel that you can work with people and would be happy in that position. I think that's a big part of it.
Absolutely. I would say, like, keep in mind for what are your ultimatums, what are your red flags, what are things that you definitely don't want to be flexible on, and if you can, or if they're not asked or communicated, try to do that from the onset. If you can, helps a little bit.
Yeah, writing things down. What a novel concept. That's
I would say-
actually very good advice.
I would say also, yeah, I mean, and on that point, if you do forget to ask a question, shoot an email, reach back out. Don't feel like that door has closed. Make sure you have those questions answered.
Yeah, that's a good, I feel like when I'm like both sides, if I'm interviewing someone or they're interviewing me, I'm always like, yeah, email me with more questions. But I've never done it. I have never emailed with follow-up questions. I've always been like, well, goodbye forever, I guess.
Especially from my lens as a recruiter, I want people to get hired, right? So I want to do whatever I can to make sure that you're comfortable, that your questions are asked, that you're prepared moving forward to your next interviews. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out if that door's open for you.
That's really good advice. I think someday I'll do it.
I think you should view your recruiter as your ally throughout the hiring process. We definitely want to see people get hired, to Casey's point. And it's really part of our job to make sure that you feel prepared for your next steps, that you have all the info with you so that you could show up the best that you can. And so part of our role is really providing that, letting you know who you'll be speaking with in the process, letting you know what the process looks like ahead of time. Of course, you should take the step and do your own research. You can always go on LinkedIn and look up the people that you're planning on speaking with. That can give you some insight of where you may have some overlap, or just what their experience is. But don't be shy with your recruiter. We're really here as an advocate for the employee. We're also looking, of course, for the best fit for the business needs. And so we're in the middle. But I think from personal experience, every recruiter has been on the other side of the table. In fact, we interview, not just interviewing others, but we interview as candidates a lot when there's downturns in the economy or, in a specific business. Recruiters are often the first to leave, because if you're not hiring, you don't need recruiters. And so we interview a lot, and we're familiar with how awkward and uncomfortable and nervous and all those aspects are very typical for everybody. I don't know anyone who is never at all nervous, regardless of their seniority, of their background. And so if you can look at your recruiter as sort of like your pal through the process, that would be your best bet. And being as honest with them in the process is also going to work in your favor, because we want to set you up in the way that works best for you if you are to come on to the team.
Yeah, I will say that, like, in the world of developers, recruiters sometimes get a bad rap, right? Because people are just generally annoyed when they get emails, I think. But at the same time, yeah, it's like no recruiter is rooting against you. Like it benefits no one for a recruiter to not want you to be successful. So I think that's a really good point. And so I want to point out, so sometimes when I'm interviewing, I'm like maybe too friendly. So we'll get to chatting and it will suddenly occur to me that, like, I don't know what I can and can't talk about when I'm interviewing. Part of that is, one, because I talk a lot when I'm nervous, but also, how do I know if I've if an interviewer is asking me something they're like legally not allowed to, or if I feel weird about it? Like, how do I know what an interviewer can and can't ask me?
I would say, listen to your gut first off. If something feels uncomfortable or feels like it's not related to the job or your qualifications, I would ask for clarification, maybe. What is it that you're trying to get from that question, or help me understand your question a bit more, to get some more framework. And if it still feels weird or not appropriate for a job interview, I would just say, that doesn't make me feel comfortable.
Totally fair.
Generally speaking, very personal details in the United States, no company is allowed to ask them. And so you should not feel compelled to answer things about your marital status, if you're a parent, your country of origin, even the way recruiters ask to find out if you require any visa sponsorship or support. That's really the proper way of asking. Do you now, or will you in the future require any sort of visa transfer visa transfer sponsorship is the most common way to ask that question. And that is legal. Because a company needs to know. Some companies can support those things and other companies can't. But asking any details that just feel like you're sort of invading my personal space here are not appropriate. Anything pertaining to your health is certainly not, and that encompasses everything: mental health, physical health, if you're planning on getting pregnant or starting a family. Sometimes it's really tricky because if you have good rapport with a candidate, they might just mention, oh, you know, or you might, especially with Zoom, you might just see their kids running in the back or make an assumption as their kids. So recruiters have to be extra careful too. And it can be hard on our end because you just get into a conversation and the convo just flows naturally. Also, recruiters cannot ask you what you're currently earning or what you have earned in the past. So be aware of that. What they can ask you is what is your target compensation range for the next role? What are you looking to make? That's totally fair. You should let them know. You should be honest about it. And you can also ask, what is the range for this role? And recruiters are required to tell you. Generally, these conversations just happen with your recruiter. So I wouldn't ask other interviewers in the process. They usually don't know and they don't have any visibility into compensation. So you should keep all those type of questions directed to your recruiter, but you absolutely can and should ask what the range is. Usually there's a range and it's still dependent on experience and sometimes geolocation. And there's a few factors that go into that range. But most companies have a range for every role that they open to be equitable in the way they pay their folks.
Yeah.
I would say also, to Lauren's point, if you're comfortable, don't be afraid to share what your expectations are for the salary for the role. It only sets you up for success later on after you've spent time interviewing to make sure that you can get the best offer that's in range with your expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I will say as a many-time candidate, that's the hardest part for me. Not coming from a tech background. I'm like, well, my last job was at the Waffle House, so probably going to be a bit more than that. But like, you know, it feels very scary to ask for what you expect, or what you think is fair, because sometimes you don't even know it's fair.
Yeah, and if you don't know, just say that. That's fair.
Yeah. Also, too, there are Glassdoor and I believe other sites will kind of give a insight to what some salary bands are for certain roles in certain companies. So that's also something good to look into ahead of time if you kind of get an idea of maybe for this company, what does this band possibly look like? Does that match with kind of what I'm looking for?
That's a good call. I have a follow-up question about Glassdoor. A lot of people I know, I don't want to say they don't trust it, but they're often if it's positive, they're like, nah, the company gets their people to do this, you know, how do we, I don't know. I've certainly never had a company be like, go fill out a positive review because you have to. But I feel like sometimes that's a perception, right? And then they'll be like, you know, there's always going to be negative ones. That's just a fact of life. Not everyone is. I think some people could have a job just writing 1-star reviews for things, frankly. It sounds like a pretty cool job, I'm not gonna lie. But I think the company is a company allowed to ask, once you're working, I know this is a little bit beyond the scope of our conversation, but just to help clean up any people's preferences out there, if today could a company come to me and say, hey, go give us 5 stars or whatever it is on Glassdoor?
I mean, there's no laws around it. There's no legality around Glassdoor, but I've never worked at a company that does that. Recruiters want folks to give reviews and we hope they're positive, but it just makes our job easier when there's positive reviews and much harder when there's not. I think in general, and I've seen this at every company I've worked at, there's always going to be a fair amount of disgruntled people, usually that no longer work at the company and didn't part ways in a way that they wanted to or on their terms. Yeah. And in terms of happy ones, certainly I've never seen any HR or recruiting department or just managers of the business ask for positive ones. the word would spread if people did that, and it wouldn't be a good look, right? So no one is doing that. I think you just have to take them all as a grain of salt and realize the truth is somewhere in the middle. These are people's personal experiences. So we can't invalidate any of them and say that's not true. That genuinely, even if it's very negative, can be how they perceive the situation. But like everything else, there's usually more than one way to look at a story. It affects people differently, both positive and negative. I think the best way is to ask people throughout the interview process, why do you stay at this company? What do you like best about it? And it's also a good question to ask, what do you think are the biggest challenges of working at CircleCI or in this role or on this team? Interviewers should be honest with you and just realize there's positive and negative everywhere you go in life. And having some negatives, having an interviewer tell you them, they're not necessarily something that you should take and decide not to work at the company, but maybe they are. And that goes back to doing that work ahead of time. What's most important to you when you're looking for your next job anywhere? And what are, to Steph's point, the deal breakers that you just cannot cross? That's a boundary for you. The more you are familiar with that, the better able you will be able to make your final decision, which is also a very difficult step in the process.
That totally makes sense. I think sometimes, I don't know, I don't want to say that it's specific to developers, but maybe anyone who's been interviewing and is in that process, it's like incredibly stressful. And I feel like we tend to get really skeptical. We just get skeptical of everything. We're like, yeah, it seems good, but they probably have a secret, because it's just like, it's very hard to be positive throughout like a lot of interviewing.
Yeah, I mean, like your point earlier, we can't ask personal questions, but we can ask people about their personal experiences at work. And like Lauren said, what keeps you here? What are you excited about? What do you see as the challenges? Those things are good things to ask. And yes, Glassdoor is part of the internet. I would take it as one piece of information. But if you do see something that's personally concerning to you or that worries you, you can ask your interviewers about it. Like, I saw this thing on Glassdoor. Have you experienced anything like that? You can ask questions like that, and I would.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good call. I don't think I've ever brought up a Glassdoor review in an interview, but in my experience, like, sometimes knowing people who leave them or whatever, like there's often a lot of context, or just like, oh yeah, well, things shook out wrong, or they were a founder that got ousted, or, there's all of this, like, everyone has like a story for why they do what they do. And I think that's definitely important to keep in mind. Steph, do you have anything to add there?
No, I don't think so. Not on that one.
Is there a right way to ask about work-life balance when you're the interviewer and you're like, my last job, I worked, I don't know how many hours in a week, 100 hours a week. And I just can't do that again. Like, I gotta go outside and smell the flowers. Like, what's the right way to talk about that? And because that's can be tied up in benefits sometimes. And yeah, it can feel like a difficult subject to tackle. What do you think, or what's your approach? Do you offer that information? Do you wait for them to ask? Like, what do we do here?
I like to ask candidates, like, what are you looking for in your next role? But and a lot of that is to kind of just see, like, how much are they going to open up to me? I'd like to hear, what are you looking for in your next role? But then I can usually say, like, oh yeah, like our team does something similar to that, or here at CircleCI, we really do care about work-life balance. But I always like to try to keep my stories from an I perspective and use I statements, in my opinion, because I don't want to speak for other teams. I don't want to, make blanket statements about the whole company. We all know that not, all companies are not perfect. There's, obviously. So just being able to share a little bit about me. I usually try to break the ice in the very beginning, because like those conversations kind of feel a little bit stiff. And, if I'm like telling people about how I almost killed all my plants last weekend, maybe they feel, I don't know, a little less nervous to tell me what they might be looking for in their next role.
They're writing down like they might be poison ivy.
Yeah.
I mean, I get asked about work-life balance all the time. That's great. And like Steph said, I speak in I statements as well. I can speak personally about what I've experienced. If it's with a specific team that I work closely with, I can speak to my experiences with that team. For example, our interaction with the marketing team. But yes, I would ask those questions. Again, it goes back to those list of things that are very important to you and those deal breakers. Make sure you do ask about those things, and your interviewers can definitely share their personal experiences.
And a good question for the manager, when you talk to the hiring manager, they generally have more specifics than the recruiter about their own team and when they expect people, like working hours. And more with companies, these working hours are less traditional. They're not always 9 to 5 anymore. I think a lot of companies are moving in the direction of letting people get the work done in the way that suits them best. That's definitely the case at CircleCI. But you have to account for collaboration. So if you are collaborating with a team in a different time zone, then you obviously have to be available at that time. And so it's a really good question so you could ask about work-life balance to your recruiter, and you should, but then you can get a little bit more specifics from the manager. Like, tell me about your team's working hours, and when would you be looking for this person to start their day? Those are completely fair questions that people should be able to answer for you, and it will give you a good sense of what it's really like to be on that team and working with that manager specifically.
Yeah. I personally, when it comes to marketing, I'm like, hey, all life, no work. Am I right? I don't say that. So the last firm question I have that I want to make sure we get to is, what level of transparency can I expect out of an interview process? And I don't know if this has happened to any of you, but I sometimes have gotten rejection emails from companies I forgot I interviewed at because it had been so long. I'm like, oh, my day was actually going fine, and then I just got rejected from something I forgot about. Rough.
Feels great.
I've definitely interviewed at places where it hasn't been clear, like, how long is this going to take? How many people am I going to talk to? Like, can I ask about that?
Absolutely.
Yes. Especially if you're interested. Go ahead, Casey.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's important because you want to know if this is going to take 3 weeks, which sometimes it does, if it's going to take a week, if you're going to talk to 12 people or 4. And that also, to Steph's earlier point, is part of the things you should think about beforehand. Like, do you want to be talking with 12 people in your interview process? And if you feel like you're waiting for feedback and it's been too long, send your recruiter an email. Again, they're your advocate, and you shouldn't be sitting around waiting or wondering what's happening next. Even if there hasn't been a decision made yet, your recruiter will let you know that. So yes, reach out and ask those questions.
I think it's important to realize that recruiting is a very human-driven process, and for better or for worse. And you might make some hopefully great connections during the interview process and want to work with the people, but the behind the scenes that people don't see is the volume of hiring any one recruiter is working on, the straddling between doing their day jobs and interviewing other teams are doing. So your manager and the other interviewers, right? They're an engineer who's stepping in to help hire for their team, or they're a salesperson that's helping, but that's not their full-time job, right? Recruiting is a whole company movement, and so everyone participates in building their teams. But sometimes there's indecision. Sometimes things start off with one way and they kind of go off the rails and change during the interview process. And sometimes there's just changes that are not visible to the candidates. And it can be really stressful and frustrating to a candidate and confusing. And sometimes there's confusion on the back end for the interview teams and even for the recruiters. Recruiting teams and directors and leads of recruiting are always trying to get better at removing these confusing circumstances and making a straightforward process that we can tell the candidate at the beginning, this is what the process is going to look like. It's going to be 4 steps. It'll be these people. You need to prepare this. And, we're not going to tell them every little thing because we want them to be engaged enough to want to do some work on their end. But unfortunately, that's just not always the case, especially in startups. Sometimes there's one person that's doing all the hiring, and I think realizing that people are human is helpful because you realize that it's not something that you should internalize and say, oh my gosh, these people didn't even get back to me yet. I must have done so bad, or I completely wasted their time. It's likely not you. It really is likely not you. It's likely the people behind the scenes trying to get it together, trying to get better as a team, trying to get better operationally. Or maybe they're just jerks and you don't want to work there anyway, right? Yeah. And that happens. I mean, I've gotten no feedback, and it's very frustrating when a recruiter doesn't get back to you specifically. We really do everything we can to try to close those loops here. We try to personalize our communication as much as we can. Quite in full transparency, companies have to be careful in what they disclose when they're not giving you an offer. Because there are people out there who will take a bit of information and try to use it in a way to say, well, this was discriminatory or something like that. And certainly in history, there has been cases of legitimate discriminatory action, and that's why it's top of mind. So companies don't always tell you, companies are sometimes just afraid to really be like, well, you weren't strong enough with this technology, when it's a simple thing, and I know especially engineers really appreciate that feedback so they can know where to get better. We try to give them what we can. But if you're not getting specifics, realize it's more out of a fear of just remaining in compliance and sort of having to straddle that line between being careful from a legal perspective and wanting to share. So yeah. Interviewing can suck. It can. You can be juggling 5 companies. You're really excited about one. They're taking forever. You have an offer over here. You really like this company, but you really want this one. But if you say no to this one might never give you an offer. And it's confusing, and and you're working a full-time job and taking care of family or whatever else you're doing. It is a full-time job in itself, and it's scary. And if you can find a recruiter in any of those companies that you feel comfortable with, be honest. Let them know. Say, I'm juggling 3 offers or 3 companies. I don't know what to do. You're my second favorite. I'm being honest with you. I really want this, but I don't know if they're going to give me an offer. Most recruiters they're sympathetic, and they will try to give you the best guidance for you. I know it sounds counterproductive, and you might want to assume they're going to do everything they can to close you, to get you to join, our company, and we will to a degree. But we also want you to be successful, and hiring someone that ends up not being happy in the company and leaving in 3 months doesn't work for recruiters, doesn't work for hiring managers, sets everything back. It costs money, it costs time, and we don't want that to happen. So the more honest you can be with the recruiter, just try to understand they really want you here if they believe it is a mutual fit, and they're not going to try to sell you on something if they think you're going to not shake out in a couple months.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Lauren. Like, most recruiters that are employees of the company that you're interviewing with, they're not compensated for you getting hired. Like, we are employees of the company. And
you just get paid like normal people?
Yeah, I mean, we genuinely are here to be your advocates, and we have had people, take offers somewhere else, figure out that it wasn't the right fit, and come back to us and say, can we open the conversation again? Yes, and we've hired them. So It really is about being human, making relationships. So I also just don't want people to feel like we are compensated for, hiring you. That's not the case.
We're not.
We reap the rewards of this, Casey, right now.
We reap the rewards by seeing that person start and make an impact on their team and grow in their career. There's no better feeling for a recruiter to watch someone be happy and successful at the company they hired them for. But to Casey's, you made a great point there. If you pass on an opportunity and later on things change, we have someone on our recruiting team that this happened to. They took an offer before we were able to make an offer. I was devastated. They came back a month later and said, you know what, this didn't work out for me, and I had such a positive experience in your process. Yeah, you may not be open to this, but is there any chance of reopening the conversation? We hired them. They are killing it. Yeah. And so take the chance. Send the email. There's nothing to lose there. If you really like a company and you're starting to think about moving and you don't see something posted that's accurate on their job, fit on the job, ask anyway. Just go ahead and ask the recruiter.
And also
So,
too, from like the pride related perspective and like the LGBTQ, if you can and are open to being brave about, who you are, if it's like different pronouns, like for me, I put them on my resume, put them on my LinkedIn. I had a past job experience where people were not interested in using my pronouns. And I had like that, thought of like, well, is that even a job that I would even take in the future? And the answer was no. And so moving forward, I was like, I'm just going to put them on everything and, see who's reaching back out to me. And I'm also, when I'm looking at other companies, I'm looking at those little things like Lauren mentioned, like the blog posts or like their careers page. Are they mentioning, like Casey said, employee resource groups? Are they, doing more than just like turning their logo rainbow colors? Are they, do they have benefits actually that are helpful for folks? Like here at CircleCI, we offer a PTO for folks who are transitioning, which is totally different from like regular PTO. And like that blew my mind first day. I was already impressed, but then like first day I was like, what? So I'm looking for things like that. I'm looking for, if I can see the team, what does the team look like? What is the messaging that they're putting out there? What is their intent, or what are they hoping to provide? And that tells me a lot going into the process.
that's a really good point. I always do a lot of interneting a company before I talk to them, so that I know what they've made public. I feel like I can ask about, right? Well, what's on their careers page, I can definitely ask about it.
Yep.
And also, like, if I don't see it there, then I'll still make a point to ask, because I want to know, is it just not on the website? Websites can get behind, or is it just not exist? And that's like super good advice.
Yeah, like right now, our ERGs are not currently listed on our website, and we have 5 of them. And we've had them for several years now. And they're a great source of inspiration. And I think just people really resonate with them. We have CircleCI, QueerSphere, Circle Minds, the Onyx Circle, and Circle API. And they're all doing great things for the business and really a safe space for people. But to your point, we are in the middle of a refresh with our jobs page. So you wouldn't know that unless you asked the recruiter, or the recruiter mentioned it. And sometimes in the course of the conversation, they won't have a chance to, or it won't be top of mind. So definitely ask away. If you ask, sometimes we get asked, oh, can you share your demographic data? That's not something we as a company are able to share for compliance reasons. So also understand that sometimes there's reasons they can't, but you could still go on LinkedIn and look up everyone who works at LinkedIn right now and get a better sense, everyone who works at CircleCI, and get a better sense from that perspective of who's in what roles. And you could do that for all companies.
Yeah, and I have.
Yeah. This next point too, asking a lot about the benefits definitely gives you a window into the culture and the work environment, because a company, it's a lot of effort to put forth these benefits that not every company has. I mean, we support 100% coverage for your dependents, same sex and opposite sex, which is huge. That was huge for me. That was one of the reasons I joined. So definitely ask those questions and put those things on the list of things that are important to you.
Yeah, I am super into this. Y'all are pretty good. I would like to just want one more trip around. Do you have any closing thoughts on bias in the interview or hiring process? Is there like just a takeaway that's really important to you that we end with? And I'll start with Steph.
Sorry. Takeaway. So I guess I'll use I statements. In the last year's been a lot, I think, for a lot of people, especially if you're a minority. And when I went into my last round of interviews before joining CircleCI, I think I had a little over 40 interviews, and I don't even know how many companies I talked to. But I remember thinking to myself that, you know what, I deserve X, and the bar is here. And I know that that may close my window of like what possible companies fall into that. But I'm okay with it. It might take me a little bit longer, but I'm really looking for a place that I can grow and thrive and like be the best person that I am. And so that was, I would say, really scary to know that like I'm definitely filtering out a lot of companies. So I would say don't be afraid to do that if you can. If you're able to financially or whatnot, because you might end up with something really amazing.
That's pretty good advice.
Katie, we lost your volume.
I know.
Oh, you're back.
I got too pensive. Lauren?
I'd say with bias, most companies who have any sort of awareness are really trying to reduce bias in their hiring process, in their companies, on their teams. Where we do structured interviewing, where we meet as a team before the role opens with the whole hiring panel, and every interviewer gets a question set, anywhere from 1 to 3 questions that they will ask every single candidate, so that the candidate is not being asked the same question 6 times. I mean, I've had this happen to me, and you feel like a droid by the end, even though you're being honest, but you just said it 5 times. Asking unique questions at every step of the process, but asking every candidate those same set of unique questions, so that we can assess answers fairly and assess candidates fairly. Where not this person's getting all these easy low balls and softballs, and this person's getting really complex puzzle questions. But unconscious bias exists. And if you really, really look hard, you're always going to be able to find it. I think look for the company that makes you feel good and feel like they're trying, and realize companies are, again, human. And I think so many companies are trying to get better and better and better, and they may not be perfect through the interview process, whether it's with bias or getting back to you super quick. But if you get the sense that they're trying to get better, joining them might help them get better. I mean, Steph has been here 2 months and is already making an impact on our team and how we look at things, bringing things like pronouns in LinkedIn to our attention. And so it's hard to find anything in life that's truly perfect, but realize that you also have an opportunity to come into a lot of companies and help make them better. And you can ask about that, hey, is there room? Like, are there any things on the horizon that you want to do? Usually companies have different type of task force or ERGs that you can join and do your part and make an impact too.
Yeah, I like that. Casey?
Yeah, I mean, Steph said some great things about just really take an inventory of what's important to you, especially if you have the time and resources to do that, and advocating for yourself. Like you said, Katie, I know that it's hard and it's something that's learned, but it's really important to advocate for yourself. And like Lauren said earlier, if you feel comfortable that you have a good relationship with your recruiter, help them to advocate for you as well. And it all will help you to make sure that, you're finding a mutually beneficial place for you career-wise at the end.
Yeah, so that's all the questions I have. Thank you all very much.
Good.
Thank you, Katie.
Like you.
So fun.